In today's video, we're going to be learning a bit of hard ops and box cutter. Let's go. So before we get started, I would highly recommend copying my settings here in the viewport shading mode so that way everything looks nice and clean like mine does. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and just trace out a basic shape. I assume you know all the basic commands for Blender. If you don't, you can grab our Jumpstart course on our site. It's free and it'll get you up to speed very quickly. So with machine tools, by the way, make sure you guys get machine tools. It is a free add-on. You can hop in and out of Edge or edit in object mode very quickly. I love this add-on. And then what I'm going to do is press Control Alt left click on these edges. That'll select all the edges in the same direction, same length. We're just going to get a nice bevel here. Just kind of an arbitrary amount of segments, kind of like that. We can sharpen it, and now we kind of have this cool basic shape going on, nothing particularly exciting. So now what I want to do is I want to add in a loop cut. And we're going to bevel it like that. And then what we can do is we can press Q and then shift click on curve extract. What that will do is take the selected faces and extract them, solidify them, and separate them, as you can see. Now whenever I use this, it turns off the cavity feature. I don't know why. You can just turn it back on though very easily. Looks great. And now what I want to do is let's add in let's use box cutter and let's just cut in a basic cut here. We're going to press T to solidify and then press enter like that. And then what I want to do is add in a small bevel here just to kind of emphasize the overall edges of this particular object. This looks pretty good, basic shape, and of course what we want to do is just make it more exciting. We can go up to the top, gonna add in a chamfer like that. Looks good. And then what we could even do is we could come up here, cut through, and then press the I key to run an inset boolean, so that way we kind of have like this inset effect here on the top, which I think looks pretty cool. Then what we can do is maybe cut in something like that. Alt X to mirror to the other side, just to kind of make this thing look a little bit more, visually appealing. And now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and add in another cube here, scale this on the Z, move this up kind of towards the upper third. Then what I want to do is scale this all the way through, and we're just going to cut a hole into this object. Now since we have two objects here, we're going to have to shift click on this one and run the difference boolean, and then shift click on this one and run the difference boolean there as well. And that looks pretty good to me. Now let's go ahead and press Control A to apply the scale and bevel these edges. So Control Alt left click. Gonna get some nice bevels in here. I think that looks great. And then what I'll go ahead and do is apply on this inner object here. Let's apply that boolean, because what I want to do is I want to add in a loop cut here on the inside, so that way we can bevel it. And then we're going to press E to extrude, right click, and then Alt S to scale along the normals. Just a little bit, and then a bit on the X as well. We can scale it. And then from here we kind of have this shape, and we could just soften it up by introducing some bevels here. So some bevels on that area. Actually, we'll do it on both sides here. Just like that. So now we kind of have like this soft inner portion of this particular object, which I think looks great. I like that. And then I also want to add in a chamfer here around this outer portion. So we could do this in a few ways. I could either apply the boolean around the chamfer, or I could simply take the cutter with ever scroll, move this face back, and then press Q and Control click on mark, and that'll run an inverted bevel on our object. Pretty cool. We could even run a mirror to the other side, so that way everything's nice and even. And I think this looks great. Like I said, I don't want to make this like a super complicated tutorial. I want this to be pretty generic, easy to follow, but I really want to show you how simple it is to create visually appealing renders inside of Blender. So we're going to get to that very shortly here. But before we get to that part, maybe what we should do is introduce some detail here on the side, because in general, you want your models to look good from all angles, top, side, and front. So what we could do here is maybe introduce a bit more excitement by perhaps cutting in a slice, press the X key, and we kind of have like a slice operation over here. And what we could even do is maybe, you know, cut in like a little notch like that, and the mirror will carry it over. And then we could even mirror to the other side as well, just to kind of make this look a little bit more visually appealing. And then here on this bottom face, what I want to go ahead and do is bevel that, Control B, just to kind of make this look a bit more exciting, I guess. So I like how this looks, and one other thing we could do is maybe cut down here, and then press the T key to solidify. And then we could also run that same boolean through this side piece. And that looks pretty good. I kind of like that effect. Cool, so pretty basic object. I'm not going to model really anything else. I wanted to keep this as simple as possible. What I do want to show you is the process of detailing. It's very important to understand how to add those tertiary level details to your model while keeping the model visually balanced. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go into material mode. If you don't have the abandoned slipway HDRI installed, head over to polyhaven.com, search for abandoned slipway, and you can install that here in the settings menu. You just click on install, and you should be able to install that. So I'm going to go ahead and load that in. I like this particular HDRI because it's very flat lighting, and this is the main one I use. So now what I want to do is I want to set up not only a floor but also a camera so we can render this. So we're going to add in a plane. Going to move this plane down to the bottom and scale it up. And this will be a pretty large plane. Just kind of like that. And what we're going to do is add in a material for the floor and also a material for the object. So we're just going to use a basic principled BSDF. I want to show you how simple it is to create good renders with very basic materials. So we're going to add in a new material. Going to drop the base color a bit, drop the roughness a bit, and also we can make it metallic, something like that. And then for this main object here, very simple, we'll add in a new material, which I guess we already have one. We're going to make this a little bit darker. We're going to make it metallic. And we're also going to make this a little bit less rough. So kind of around here. So it looks pretty good. And also what we could do is we could have like a separate set of materials. So for example, this outer case right here could be darker maybe. So what I'm going to do is add in a new material, and we can just do that by copying the current one and clicking this number. What that will do is make a duplicate of the material. So that way when I change the color, it won't affect the other one. So same for this one. Let's give this the material 002, and I'm just going to make this outer color a little bit darker, just so that way we have a nice contrast between the two objects. So we could do something like that. Looks great. And now we can see how this looks in rendering mode. You also need to make sure you install that abandoned slipway HDRI here in the world panel. You just go to environment texture and load that in, so then when you go into cycles here, it should be loaded in very nicely. So now you can see we have the floor, we have the object, and generally what you want is you want to see where the lighting's coming from. In this case, you can see the lighting's coming from this direction. If I turn off this transparent feature, we can actually see it. So the lighting is coming from this direction mainly, which means it's going to hit the front of the object. So I wouldn't really want to have my camera here because it's not really being lit up, or we just have kind of like a dark backside. So ideally we want this thing to be angled kind of towards the light more or less. So that way when we set up our camera, we have a nice lit up model from this side, as you can see. I'm going to go ahead and turn transparent back on here. I don't need the backdrop. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in a camera. So let's press Shift A and then go to camera. And I'm just going to go to view, align view, and then align the active camera to the view. And to move the camera in and out is very simple. You just press G and then Z to move along the local axis. And if you want to get back into camera view, you can press 0 on the number pad. So we're just going to move this back a bit. And we're just going to find like a general angle here. Maybe like this. We can realign the camera. Like that. Now we're also going to need a backdrop for this object. So let's just duplicate the floor, rotate it 90 degrees. And what we can do is just move this back. Kind of like that. You're going to see we kind of have a clear like cutoff point for that plane. We could scale the plane up so it kind of fades into the backdrop nicely. And we could also move the backdrop a lot further back. And just kind of play with the rotation. You can see different rotations are going to yield different lighting results. So this one's a bit darker on the side because it's more rotated, you know, in this direction. Whereas if I rotate it in this direction, it's kind of capturing the light and bouncing it back onto the object a bit. And you can see that's why it's kind of illuminated back here. I think this particular angle is more interesting. But at the same time, this one is a bit brighter. I think we'll start with this one. Now, another thing we could do for the backdrop here is we could simply increase the roughness value and try to more or less blend the floor with the backdrop. You see what I mean? Now, a line in the background, you can kind of see that clear line, isn't necessarily an issue as long as it flows nicely with the overall scene, but I want to try to soften this up as much as I can. You can even get a straight up contrast like this if you wanted to. I just want to keep this about the same. And if you can find that right value, scale up your plane, you're going to see it kind of blends in very nicely. So in terms of composition and rendering, really all you need to do is figure out which angles look good and which rotations look good, and just play with it really. So when you understand how the lighting operates and how it bounces off different objects and how materials interact with each other, the more you'll kind of begin to understand this. So what we're going to do here is make that fully rough, this backdrop. Maybe not. Maybe we'll keep this more reflective. Or what I could do is just turn off the metallic value. The only thing I might want to do here, since these are sharing the same material, is I might want to give this one a separate material. We'll click on that number. So now any changes I make here will not be affected on the main plane. Probably should have done that earlier, but that's all right. Can scale that up. Try making the metallic value 0. And sometimes it just kind of blends a bit better in my opinion if you can find the right spot for it. We could try tweaking the floor as well and just see how adjusting the roughness will look. You know, right around here isn't too bad. We have a nice reflection here on the bottom, and also doesn't look too bad in the background. Now, another option you have for renders like this is you can simply create an infinite backdrop, which is basically where this plane is massive. Let's scale that down. That's basically where you extrude this, move it up a bit, maybe 30-degree angle, and then you add in a bunch of bevel segments here, smooth it out. And what this will do is create an infinite backdrop, which is basically just going to kind of keep everything nice and neutral in the background, I guess is the best way to put it. What I probably should do here is scale that a bit on the Y so it's not cropping in that camera angle. And you can see now we have a very neutral background if that's kind of what you're going for. Just really depends on your overall style. Now, I particularly like what we had going on before. I just wanted to show you the different solutions. I think this looks a little bit more interesting, visually appealing, so I'm going to leave that alone. And now what I want to do is I want to add in some decals. Now the decals I'm going to be using are from our Sci-Fi Corporation Info Decal Pack. You can get these for free on our website. Just head over to blenderbros.com, and on our store page, if you scroll down, you'll see the pack. It's completely free, just our gift to you. And basically, you can just load that into Decal Machine. If you don't know how, Google's your friend. Our tutorials are also your friend. And what you can do is you can just load in something that looks cool given the context. So maybe, there's a few different ones. I have a few different packs here. You just have to find the one that you like the most. Let's see. I'm just gonna take a basic one cube machine and just gonna rotate this R, Y, Y, no, R, X, X, R, Z, Z, 180. There we go. And we're just gonna place this right here on the front. And generally what you want to do with these types of decals is you want to make sure they're not too like distracting. So generally you're going to want to drop the alpha value here in the materials panel. So we'll put this to about 0.2 or maybe 0.4. So that way you can see it, but it's not too like, it's not too bright and pulling attention. So we can do that. And then I also want to add in some additional decals kind of scattered around this object. So let's go ahead and select this decal, shift click on this object, and then press Alt X to mirror it. And sometimes let's just try mirroring over the 3D cursor instead. So Alt X, and then you can turn on the advanced option and change to cursor, and then it will mirror over the 3D cursor like that. And also you might want to project these decals. So Alt click on project. Alt click on project. If you don't know how to use decal machine, we have several decal machine tutorials on our YouTube channel, so you can check those out. And then maybe here on the side what we could do is we could make like a little notch of some sort, just very small, not super imposing, maybe like right here. I'm going to project it, scale it a bit maybe, and then project it, and then mirror it to the other side. Now we have these subtle little details here on the side which look good. And then here on the bottom we could also add in some decals. So maybe, I don't know, there's a few different ones I could use. Maybe something like this. And just rotate it. And then project those. And then just mirror to the other side. Very simple. Now these are very eye-pulling, so let me try going to material match and just finding a better one to match it with. Maybe something like that. Looks good. And let's hop back here into cycles and just see how this thing looks in rendered mode. Looks amazing. You can see how nicely that light is hitting the front of this object. And then what we could do is we could fill the frame here a little bit by just introducing some more interesting elements. Before we do that, I want to show you one other way you could make this look even more interesting, and that is by using trim sheet. So for example, what I could do here is I could add in like some closed loops up here, Alt click the faces, and then if I wanted to, I could find a trim sheet, which like I said is available in our trim sheet pack. And you could basically just run a trim sheet here on this particular object. So before you run trims, you generally want to smart apply your Boolean modifiers. Otherwise, you might run into issues because basically it'll have like random areas selected. But as long as your Booleans are applied, you should be able to run trims pretty easily without issues. And you can just introduce some of these really clean, simple elements on the top. And you can find which one looks the best depending on your design. I'm going to go for something a little bit more simplistic, not too eye-pulling. I think I was already on this one. Let's try this BB Trim 5 and just find a really basic one. Something like this could work maybe. And you're going to see we just have this nice subtle detail there on the top, and you can do that pretty much anywhere. So trim sheets are great for adding that additional level of detail without actually modeling that in, because you can see this looks like we modeled in the details, but in fact we didn't. It's just a texture. So you can imagine if you tried to model the stuff in, it simply wouldn't look, well, it would look good, but it wouldn't be as easy because of how small the details are. And then God forbid you add a bevel, it's just going to collapse. So trim sheets are great for dealing with those situations. So this looks good. Let me go ahead and power save this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole box here and we're going to press Q, operations, and then smart apply. So that way everything except the bevel is applied. And then what I can do is I can take this and maybe fill the frame a bit by introducing some more. So for example, I could press Shift D to duplicate, rotate it 90 degrees over the Y, maybe in the negative direction. And then I can just kind of move this on the floor, kind of like that. And then G, Shift Z to move it kind of like that. And you can see we can simply make the composition a little bit more exciting by simply introducing the same element in kind of a different orientation. I could even stack them. I could come up here and rotate that so it kind of looks like we have additional crates in here. You're going to see it looks very, very clean. A little bit tight here. So what we could do is we could either move these to the left a bit or move the camera a bit to the right. I don't want to keep this too cramped. I want there to be a little bit of space on the side. Some people get really close like this, and you can see how much different the composition looks. It's very, very important to have these things nice and balanced. And one final thing we could do, which is kind of the icing on the cake, is to introduce some reflectors. These are very basic. All you need to do is add in a plane, move the plane over, rotate the plane 90 degrees. Make sure the plane is angled at the light source. And we're just going to make this plane have a new material set to pure white with 100% roughness. And what we can do is if we scale up this reflector and rotate it, notice how it changes the look of the objects. Notice if I scale it up, it makes the left side a lot more bright. And if I scale it down, it kind of reduces that. So you can see this is without the reflector. It's very dark. This is with the reflector. And you can kind of customize how the light's getting reflected simply by adding in a reflector. I could even make the reflector dark and reflect like a dark light, which is not what we want, but you kind of get the idea here. You can play with reflectors and get all sorts of different results if you wanted to. In this case, I don't think we need one. I think this side is just at the right amount of darkness, so we're going to leave that alone. And now this last part's very simple. We just need to render this scene out. So what we're going to do is go here. I like to render at a higher resolution because I can always downscale later if needed. So I'm going to render at 2560 by 1440. And then what I'm going to do is make sure our denoise option is turned on in the render panel. And I'm going to change the samples to 256 because the denoise will take care of any noise we have. So now all we need to do is just go into solid mode and then go up here to render and render the image. It should only take a few seconds to a few minutes depending on your machine. You can see here on my particular machine with a 3090, it's only going to take like 18 seconds or whatever. So here's the render, very simple, very basic, and not that hard to set up. So we're going to go ahead and save the image. Now I'd recommend saving this image as a TIFF 16-bit RGBA is fine. We'll just call this whatever we want and save it. Now one thing I always tell you, always touch up your work. Whether you do that in a basic free software or something more advanced like Photoshop, you should always be post-processing your work. The difference between an unedited photo and an edited photo, regardless of how you feel about it, is that the edited photo, assuming you know what you're doing, is always going to pull more attention, which is exactly what you want for your work. So I'm going to show you a very basic way to touch up your photos. It doesn't take much, 5 to 10 minutes at most. So what I'm going to do is take this layer, press Ctrl J here in Photoshop, and if you're using another software, just kind of follow the general idea. And the first thing I want to do is increase the exposure a bit. So we're going to go here to Filter, and then Camera Raw Filter. And from here what we can do, let me move this down here so you can see what I'm pressing. And from here all we really need to do is introduce a little bit of exposure. Don't go too high, you don't want to overexpose it. You don't want to clip the whites. But you could go to something like, I don't know, 0.25 here isn't too bad. We could also play a little bit with the clarity. Clarity is fantastic. Just make the image a bit more enhanced, you can see. And then also, whenever you lift clarity, you want to also lift the shadows because clarity tends to introduce shadows. So more or less kind of match those values. Click OK. And you can already see how much better this looks in just, 20 seconds. Let's go in here one more time and just do a few more basic adjustments. Okay. So maybe we could play with the highlights just a bit. There's not too many highlights on here really. It's all overall pretty neutral. You can leave that alone. You could also lift the whites a bit if you wanted to. Just see how that looks. Not too bad. And really all you need to do at this point is introduce a little bit of contrast. I think a little bit of local contrast always looks pretty good. So to do that is very simple. If we go to adjustments and go to curves, we can maybe lift this a bit and then drop this a bit. We just call this an S curve basically. So you can kind of play with this, see what different results look good for your scene. Don't go too crazy. It should be very subtle. And you can just play with it, see what you like. So here's the before, here's the after. You can really see that contrast makes it pop. And if it's too strong for you, you can always drop the opacity a bit until it kind of fits your liking. Let's do like 50% opacity on the curves. And you can see how nice that looks. Really illuminates everything pretty clean. And if you want to, you can also change the color a bit. You can use something like the color balance tool. I tend to use paid plugins, but I mean, these tools are totally fine here in Photoshop. You know, you could introduce a little bit more in the mid-tones, a bit more blues. And then in the shadows, if you wanted to make the shadows have a bit more blues in there, you can just really make these nice subtle effects. And the highlights you could also, you know, play with. And you can just see it looks a little bit more purple in this case. I think it looks better. And the last thing I'm going to do is very simple. I'm going to go ahead and press Control-Alt-Shift-E. What that will do is combine all the layers together. Then we can go to the Camera Raw filter. And this is one of my favorite parts. What we can do here is we can go down to Effects and we can introduce a little bit of film grain. Now you don't want to go too high, but a tad bit of film grain over the image really makes it just feel a little bit more three-dimensional. Not to mention that metals tend to have little spectacles on them, so it also looks a bit more metallic given the scene. So maybe like 20 on the grain. You could also do a little bit of vignette if you wanted to, but you know, don't go too crazy with it. Make it subtle. And click OK. Then you can see we have this nice basic image. I don't like that vignette. I'm going to go ahead and undo that and just stick with the film grain. We'll keep the film grain set to 20. Click on OK. And there we go. As a matter of fact, if we do want to use a vignette, I think a vignette in the darker direction would kind of help enclose the image. So instead of going this way, we could just make a very subtle vignette in the negative direction. Just a bit, not too much. You can just see very slight vignette around the border. So that is basically it. A really simple model with a beautiful render. And like I said, even if the model is simple, if you know how to present it properly, this is going to deliver way more value than a complex model with a really shitty presentation. So I'd highly recommend focusing not only on modeling and design, but also on presentation because it is very, very important. So now if you want to save the image, you can just go to Save as Copy. I don't know why Photoshop has done this, but in order to access the JPG, you need to go to JPEG in the Save Copy menu, and that's how you do it. So that's it. Really simple tutorial. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a bit about the tools and my general workflow. If you did, just drop me a thumbs up. Really appreciate it. And like I said, if you want to take something a bit more in-depth, check out our Hard Surface Modeling Jumpstart course over on our website. It is free and really great for getting to grips with Blender and the overall workflow and the tools we use. So thanks for watching and see you in the next one.